I'm Julie Legg, author of The Missing Piece and diagnosed with ADHD at 52. Welcome to ADH Difference. In this episode, we'll be discussing ADHD paralysis with special guest Caroline Beresford, a Sydney-based ADHD coach. She was diagnosed with ADHD in her 40s and has experience of parenting ADHD children. She has a wealth of knowledge and first-hand insights to share. Thank you very much, Caroline, for joining us today. We're going to be talking about understanding ADHD paralysis. But first of all, I've got lots of questions about your personal ADHD journey. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Julie, for having me today. I'm really happy to be here. So where do I start? Where would you like me to start?
Well, I guess if we can start from the beginning with regards to what prompted you to seek an ADHD diagnosis.
Okay. So I'm a mother of two beautiful teenage boys, and my eldest boy had always, I wouldn't say struggled, but he had found primary school a little bit challenging in terms of friendships and being able to control his impulses pretty much all the way through primary school. And it wasn't until around the end of year 5 that we got a clear-cut diagnosis of ADHD for him. And after that, we went into COVID, of course, and the lockdowns that came along with all of that. I was working as an interior designer, focusing on retail and hospitality design at that time. And of course, I lost the majority of my projects, so I had a lot of time up my sleeve. I had heard of this amazing coach training program, ADHD coach training program called the ADD Coach Academy, which is an academy based over in New York. I had a friend that had started her coach training there, and I thought, what a great opportunity for me to throw myself into this space of neurodiversity, because it was really important for me to understand how my son's brain was working so I could support him, and I had time on my hands. So I enrolled in the initial module, which was called Simply ADHD, and that's where I became incredibly passionate about understanding neurodiversity, in particular ADHD. And it was during that time that I learned about, how genetic it is, how it's 5 times more likely to be passed down through the mother's side, all of the different subtypes. I thought it was just, quintessentially little boys bouncing off the walls, because that's what it was known as in my time. So the more I found out, the more I sort of started, just mentally ticking off the boxes. So it then led me to think, I'm really resonating with a lot of these symptoms. So I was lucky. I found an amazing psychiatrist, and because it was lockdown, he had opened up some new appointments on telehealth, which they didn't do that often. So I was lucky. The diagnostic process for me was pretty simple, and yeah, it was actually a really incredible experience for me.
So, Caroline, you were diagnosed with an inattentive subtype of ADHD. Genetically, it's not always passed down the same. Often it can be one of the 3 types. What was it in your situation?
In our situation, it was exactly that, Julie. It was so me being the inattentive. I have one child diagnosed with the hyperactive impulsive subtype, and then the other child was recently diagnosed with the combined subtype, which is, of course, the combination of the hyperactive impulsive and the inattentive.
And were there signs that you had ADHD earlier in life that you can now recognise in retrospect but didn't at the time?
Absolutely.
Mm.
Yeah, absolutely. I've thought about this a lot. I had my diagnosis formalized for me. It was about 4 years ago now. So I was 47 at the time. And I've had a lot of time to reflect. And often I'll be driving in the car and a little memory will pop up. And then I'll think, oh, it just makes sense now.
Yeah.
Little things like, I was very, very diligent at school. I never wanted to do the wrong thing. My parents might disagree with that, but I worked hard, even though I did quite often. Looking back now, I'm aware that I did, especially in the later years of my schooling, I would leave everything to the last minute. So it was always a scramble and, pulling the all-nighters. I do remember that. Uh, School reports, I've gone back over those, and it was always, she's a charming girl, she's polite, she's hardworking, but she's not meeting her full potential. Yeah, so those little things. But the funniest thing I do remember is I think I was in year four, so I would have been 10, 9 or 10. And I remember mum bought me a pair of new shoes. And I was obsessed with these shoes, so obsessed with them that I would take them to school every day and sit them on my desk. And so, of course, the other kids would look at me and think, she's like, what's going on here? Is she showing off that she's got these new shoes? And guess what the shoes look like, Julie? They were multicolored, striped with like little fine, beautiful threads of gold sparkles through them. And
Ah.
and they were like my thing that I would sit on my desk and they would just help me focus because they were sparkly and shiny. And yeah, so
Wow.
and
Wow.
I still love shiny, sparkly things.
Don't we all? Don't we all? No, that's wonderful. And how did it feel when you were first diagnosed? That, a range of emotions. How was it for you?
I think for me, I'm my case is a bit of a unique one that I feel very blessed to have had. Actually, as I said before, I was already immersed in my ADHD coach training through ADCA, and so I was surrounded by the most incredibly neuro affirming group of people from the United States, from the UK, from South America, from Canada. So there were probably about 30 people in my cohort that I trained with all the way through. And we were catching up that the training that we do through ADCA for our coach training is quite rigorous. That it's 3 hours of virtual training in a group twice a week. And then you have 2 hours worth of your mentor training and your like coaching buddies as well, like where you do practice training and stuff. So I pretty much had constant contact with these incredible people that had, I think probably 90% of them had all been diagnosed before they had started. So I was one of the scragglers that sort of got the diagnosis halfway through. So for me, it was like, oh gosh, okay, it just, if I can borrow your title of your book, it was the missing piece for me. It was like, oh, that makes sense. It just made sense. It was a relief.
Mm.
And it gave me the space to actually sit back and start thinking about all of my flaws. Well, I don't really call them flaws anymore. I just call them my quirks. But having that diagnosis gave me the space and the insight to actually then just look at it in a different way with greater self-compassion and understanding.
Absolutely. That's the most amazing thing, I think, to come from a diagnosis, to begin that work. Before we start going into in depth about your ADHD coach training that you offer, I did want to ask, I think it's quite remarkable that we all we make it through to adulthood, undiagnosed, and somehow we pull together strategies to manage some of our traits. Did you have any strategies, or did you bumble your way through undiagnosed? These ADHD traits often trip us up left, right, and center. How did you manage yours?
I was thinking about this the other day, actually, because it's a really good question. Someone asked me the same thing. I think it was one of my clients, and I had to think for a little while. But when I reflected, I think I was really good at masking my ADHD, which explains why the diagnosis didn't come forth or come forward until I started digging myself. But I think I was able to mask it by just being super organized. And I remember when I did get my diagnosis, a couple of my close friends who knew me really well said, "You ADHD? No." Actually, even my GP said, "Are you sure? No. Are you sure? Does this psychiatrist know you?" And I just said, "Thank you, guys. That's all very complimentary, but my organisation came at a cost. Especially because I've always put my family first and my boys and being on top of everything for them. I think my work suffered a lot. So then, of course, the ADHD tax of like having to stay up late because you've spent all day looking after kids stuff. So I guess, so having just being really, really probably overly vigilant in terms of checking the family calendar all the time. That was probably one of the strategies that I developed.
I guess with that too, Caroline, I think that's a prime example about how others see us. Their observation may be the extreme opposite of what's going on inside our brains, whether it's, appear to be very attentive and onto it, or never arrives late, always prompt on time and highly organized. That's what they see, with a huge amount of effort from us. But when we retreat into our own space and our safe space, we don't need to mask. It's quite easy, really, to see those traits shining through. So
yeah, absolutely.
I completely understand and get that. I was going to now ask you actually about your ADHD coach training, because that is what you do. And I'm just wondering, what does the ADHD coach training curriculum usually cover? So when you're going through your own training, I know it'll be very wide, but what do you cover?
So I can probably make it easy for everyone listening, and for you, Julie, to sort of process this, I guess. So there were three components. As I said earlier in our chat, I initially just signed up for the Simply ADHD, the module 1, because I had no plans in changing my career at that point. I thought that, everything will be sweet. I had a really small but successful interior design business that I'd had running for 10 years, actually. And I thought, once everything opens up again, I'll go straight back into design and I'll pick up where we left off. But that didn't happen. I did go back to design, and I guess the market had really changed there. And I think the decision to move across into coaching was purely driven by my need to actually use my lived experience and my knowledge to actually make a big, make a change, make a difference, make some impact for people that might be finding living with ADHD challenging as well. So, sorry, a little bit of a tangent there, but back to the framework of my training. So we started out with the module 1, which is Simply ADHD. And that covers, it's really an introduction into what is ADHD. You know, the term's thrown around a lot. What is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder? You know, what is it by definition? The training that I chose to do is very evidence-based. So they looked at all of the studies and the evidence, the clinical trials that have been done in terms of genetics. We looked at, treatment types. We looked at, even the 3 subtypes. You know, not many people know that there are 3 different subtypes of ADHD. So it was a real the basics of ADHD. We looked at, what is executive function, because that's a key to understanding, where our ADHD symptoms comes from. So we learnt about the 12 main executive skills and how, they then manifest into the symptoms depending on what executive skills are impacted by our own personal ADHD experience. And of course, before I move on to module 2, they were very big on reframing. Reframing in a sense of you're not broken, this whole idea of it's an illness. And they were reframing it into, and I love this, they talk about it not being a deficit of attention. It's more of a redirection of interest, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And that really resonated with me. So it was all about learning how to use the right language. So in terms of rather than saying, oh, you have a, ADHD, it's a mental disorder, or it's like we have different brain wiring or unique brain wiring. So it's that I think part of my mission through coming out of ADCA is to really work on advocating that, it is purely our brains work differently. We process information differently to continue to do the work on lifting the stigma around ADHD.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So module 2 was it was personal development. So it was learning about all of the different the different models that I now use in my coach training. So it was learning about the strengths model and boundary setting, those sorts of things. Mm-hmm. And then the 3rd module was our basic training. And so that was, a lot of that was, how to actually set up a coaching practice. The bulk of that module was purely like practical work, practice. And we needed to do 100 hours of practical work before we could then graduate from that training program.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's full on, but gosh. Now, having ADHD yourself, you're bringing something magical to the coach training party, so to speak. And how has having ADHD yourself influenced your coaching approach?
My coach approach is very much based on exploring our unique selves, because through knowledge is power, and the more we can understand how our brains work and how our brains and our bodies are connected, only then can we learn to have self-compassion and understanding. So I often, when I'm working with my clients, I find myself really putting myself in their shoes and relating back to, I so get where you are right now. I've been there. I see you. I hear you, because most of the time, people just want to be heard and understood. So I come very much from a self-compassion, self-awareness and knowledge perspective.
I was going to ask too, with all of your clients coming through, what are the most common challenges that they have and need help from you with?
Yep. So when I'm working with my clients, because the symptoms are actually all stemming from which particular executive skills are being impacted by the imbalance of our neurotransmitters. Sorry if that's a little bit jargony. We need one of your warnings, Julie. So I always link it back to, okay, what are you experiencing? So it could be procrastination. And so I think, okay, let's link that back to which executive skill is in play here. And so procrastination is linked to task initiation. So a big one for most of my clients, regardless of whether they're a student or an executive, everyone seems to struggle with task initiation and getting things started. They get stuck. Well, we get stuck. Yeah. Prioritising, so prioritisation and planning, which is another defined executive skill. And that's, I guess, finding it challenging to, overwhelming. We've got all of these things to do. And sort of deep down, we do know that we should do X, but we choose to do Y because it's not as threatening. And so I see procrastination very much tied to that as well.
Today we're going to actually be talking about ADHD paralysis, and I think this is all part of it. Would you be able to, might as well leap straight in there. Can you define what the term ADHD paralysis is?
Of course. So ADHD paralysis, I like to talk about it in the sense of ADHDers are, most of us are great in a crisis. So under pressure, and if it's not a decision involving us, we are pretty much, we can make it a split-second decision under pressure if it needs to be done urgently and if there's not too much information involved. What happens when there is a lot of complex information to sift through and work through, and when we need to be able to sift through that information to be able to make an informed decision or choice, that's when the paralysis, that freezing can set in, because it's too overwhelming for the ADHD brain to be able to, I guess, methodically work through all of that information. So our brain freezes.
That's interesting too, isn't it? Because when you think about it's not just procrastination, which outsiders could even say, oh, you're being lazy, you don't want to do that role. There's a whole bunch of ADHD traits coming together as, the fight, flight or freeze, that freezing, not knowing what to do, and the overwhelm, as well as self-doubt, and there's a whole bunch of other things all thrown in. So very interesting, and I can understand that would be a common one. And why do professional women often find ADHD paralysis particularly challenging?
In my experience, talking to, with my own lived experience, and also working with so many women, that most of my clients have been late diagnosed, actually, because we were the generation that, when there wasn't as much evidence as there is now. We're lucky to be living in this day and age now. I think it's particularly challenging for women diagnosed with ADHD because we have busy brains anyway. I mean, I don't mean to be gender sort of biased here or anything like that, but at the end of the day, a lot of the thinking around keeping, family calendars and all of that sort of stuff, appointments, medical appointments, that still seems to be falling back on the mother. In my case, I actually like to do that myself anyway, because that's me feeling like I'm in control of everything. I've got everything sorted. So I think that with that mental load that we're carrying around for our families. If we then throw in, a whole wad of information based on like making a single decision on something, that just often is just it's just too much for the ADHD to be able to work through. And if we can circle back to what you were talking about before, Julie, about all of the so many of these ADHD traits all working in together at any one time, this is a great example of where this happens, because you've got the woman that has got all of the balls in the air with being a mum, keeping the house running, keeping her job going, exceeding in her career, and then something, a big, important decision is thrown into the mix. That can just be enough to really make that woman feel quite overwhelmed and scared and threatened in a way. The decisions, even though to the outsider it might seem like a really simple decision to make, in that moment for her, it can feel really scary and it can be perceived as a threat. And so what happens when we feel like we're in a threatening situation? Our frontal cortex, where all of our executive functioning happens, that switches off. And our amygdala, our monkey brain, where our fight or flight or freeze happens, that switches on. And so procrastination is essentially a fight or flight response. One more symptom that's actually happening with all of this is that inner critic and the self-doubt and the second guessing.
Yeah.
How many times have you actually made a decision and then gone to bed that night and not slept because you're worrying about the decision that you've made? Yeah. I know I've done that hundreds of times.
Yeah. And add to that perfectionism and people pleasing.
Yes.
And, we're trying to be Wonder Woman, where actually that's unrealistic. We're human. We can only take so much on board. Probably juggling. I love that analogy of juggling. So many balls in the air at any one time. One extra ball and the whole thing's going to fall. So I think we're very aware that things could come tumbling down quickly if we're not careful. But are you able to share some success stories of some clients who've really taken on a new look or transformed their relationship with task initiation?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
definitely. I'm not working with her anymore, this particular lady, because my work is done. We did some great things. My role is to actually do myself out of a job. So unless they, want to go into like a mentorship type agreement, which happens sometimes. But I was working with this gorgeous woman. She was a professional in a leadership role, and she would struggle with putting workshops together. And it wasn't just the workshop content. She was fine with that. She could get up and present and run a workshop, to hundreds of people and just speak off the cuff because she really knew her stuff. But where she was getting stuck was actually she would have an assistant putting imagery for her slides together. But, of course, the night before she would start looking through all the imagery and she would think, no, that image isn't right for that. So she would then basically, I think she came to me ultimately because she had stayed up. She had stayed up all night before a really important workshop, and it really, that lack of sleep, because a lack of sleep can really sort of ramp up our ADHD symptoms. She was very upset that she had sort of fallen into that trap of perfectionism, and the reason why she had left it right up to that last minute was because she knew that she would probably fall into that trap. So, you know, so we did some work around, what is perfect anyway. We did some inner critic work, but I think the strategy that she found most useful was, I like to call it my post-it note strategy, and that strategy is all about choosing a day and time 2 weeks before the workshop is actually happening, or whatever you're preparing for. So in this case, we set it for 2 weeks beforehand. She timed herself for 25 minutes using another time management technique that I use. And she got a pack of Post-it notes. And in that 25 minutes, the task is that you just write down a single word or a phrase, everything that she had in her mind that she wanted, the most important things of her workshop that she wanted to talk to. And then she organised them into themes, and then she set out to review what her assistant had found and tweaked the images that she wasn't happy with. So it's all about planning well in advance, and she gave herself a time limit. You're only going to get 25 minutes to brainstorm exactly what imaging you want in here, and then, with plenty of time to refine it.
I like that too, because if we don't give ourselves deadlines, they go on and on, don't they? And we spend way too much time, which sort of, which is has a ripple effect and then encroaches on other important aspects of our work or projects. So now I can see that working. Very good, and it's great that she doesn't need to see you. You've done a very good job. Very good job. Procrastination is often overwhelming. And also, I can imagine ADHD paralysis is also often misunderstood by neurotypicals, or those not really, maybe overlooking some of the symptoms. What would you like people to understand about ADHD paralysis?
I think the most important message for everyone to understand with regards to ADHD paralysis is it's not laziness. It's not it's not an avoidance tactic. So it's not it, and a lot of the time, with many of our ADHD symptoms that show up, ADHD paralysis, there's a lot of shame around that. I hear that in with the clients that I work with, and I've been there as well myself. Now I understand what it is and what's wrapped up in this whole concept. I am kinder to myself, and I'm more aware of it, so it doesn't actually, I don't fall into that trap as much anymore. So I think it's not, take away the negative connotation and look at this with compassion and understanding, because when we've got more understanding, we're actually opening ourselves up to finding the strategies that work, because there's lots of things that can be done if you find the right person to work with.
Which is my next question to you. What would you say to a professional who is struggling with ADHD paralysis, who might be listening today? What's the first step you think that they should take?
The first step you should take, to everyone listening, if you are struggling with this particular challenge, is talk to someone. Find someone to talk to. Try and shift past the shame and reach out to someone. Hopefully you've got someone who you feel safe with and who you feel comfortable talking to. either in the workplace or a family member, just reach out and talk to someone. I think that would be my recommendation, rather than freezing and hiding and just hoping that it will go away, because the more that you stay in that space, the worse it will get.
And talking to an ADHD coach like yourself is a way not just to express what you're going through, but to come up with some brilliant strategies that are actionable, and with your support too, guiding them through. Yeah. Now,
absolutely.
Caroline, all of your details are going to be in the copy notes of this podcast. So anyone listening wanting to reach out to Caroline will have some details there for you. It's been a pleasure chatting with you today. However, we were going to mention a little something that might be coming up in the near future. Would you like to chat about that?
I would love to, and I'm so excited about this, Julie. I'm so excited. So Julie and I are going to be launching a very new little venture together. It's our very first webinar. So Julie is going to be talking to all things ADHD from a New Zealand perspective, and I will be speaking from an Australian perspective. And it is a webinar for late diagnosed ADHD adults based in either Australia or New Zealand. So you could be someone who has just received a late diagnosis, and you're navigating a path forward, or you could be someone that's, on the journey to finding your diagnosis. So please stay tuned. I think Julie is going to put our contact platform details in the show notes. Please follow us both and you will get updates through that.
Absolutely, and I'm very much looking forward to it as well. From my work as ADHD author and the experiences I've gathered with numerous women and your expertise in the coaching field, I think we'll be able to answer a whole bunch of questions and maybe put a few stereotypical myths to bed and raise some of the stigma around some of the stigma around ADHD. So really looking forward to that. We will keep you posted if you stay in touch with us, as Caroline said, and we'll be chatting again soon. So thank you, Caroline, and we will talk to you shortly.
Thanks, Julie. Bye-bye.